Known as the place where the community gathers to discuss challenges, create opportunities, and celebrate accomplishments, the Levin College Forum program is a catalyst for thoughtful public debate, innovative thinking, new ideas, and timely action addressing critical issues that impact Northeast Ohio.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kathy Hexter. I run the Center for Community Planning and Development here at the college and the Levin College Forum. And it is my pleasure to welcome you today to Arts as a Catalyst for Neighborhood Revitalization. I want to begin by saying that today's forum is supported by the Walter B. Wagen Endowed Urban Education Lecture Fund. And this is a fund that was named for CSU's second president, and it supports an annual lecture in his honor or memory now. He was the person who served as CSU's president when this college was created in 1977. And upon leaving the university, he created this endowment for a lecture fund. So we are very grateful to the Wagen family for supporting this forum program. So, as you all know, Cleveland's neighborhoods are very busy reimagining themselves. I think we only need to look around at the many strong CDCs in our city to see that they are hard at work, building on their heritage, reimagining their future, and becoming attractive places once again for existing residents to live and newcomers to settle and visitors to visit. Today we're going to take a look in depth at 4 neighborhoods that are using arts and culture, each in a very different and unique way, to reimagine their neighborhoods. And they are using arts and culture as part of a broader community development strategy. So the central question that I think we're all asking today is, how can arts and culture support community development work? And we're going to start with a presentation by Dr. Dennis Keating. For those of you that don't know Dr. Keating, he is a professor emeritus here at the college, and he is a nationally recognized expert on neighborhoods and community development and housing issues. He's also one of the most prolific authors in our college, and that, quite frankly, is one of the reasons we are here today. He has just published a book, A Brief History of Tremont, which he is going to talk about. And I do have to say, he's making me say this, just kidding, that the book will be for sale, and he is very happy to sign it after today's forum. Over by the registration table, Dennis? Okay. So first I'm going to introduce Dennis, and then he will be followed by our 3 panelists, Jenny Spencer, Brian Friedman, and Michael Fleming, and I will introduce each of them in turn. So, Dennis.
Thanks, Kathy. So you'll be hearing about 4 neighborhoods today, including Tremont. There are many other, or several other Cleveland neighborhoods, so this is not meant to be all-encompassing, but to limit the number of speakers and make it at least reasonable in terms of time, we could have talked about Larchmere, Little Italy, Slavic Village. Many Cleveland neighborhoods are using arts and culture in some respect, but today you'll hear about these four. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background to neighborhoods using arts and culture, both in Cleveland and nationally, and some of the organizations that have supported it. And then having done research on Tremont that resulted in the book that was published in April, I'll talk about Tremont as one of the older examples of a Cleveland neighborhood that's been doing this for quite a while. This is generally under the rubric of placemaking, and we've seen it across the country in many, many cities. Basically deliberately using arts and culture and converting old buildings, warehouses, homes, attracting artists and arts organizations. So Cleveland is not unique, but I would certainly place it among cities in terms of being a leading example of doing this and being supported both nationally and locally. Cleveland has a long history of supporting the arts and culture like many other cities. If we look to Playhouse Square out our front door here, we've had those 5 theaters restored now through the efforts of many people over the last several decades. Now, as they claim, the largest concentration of playhouses between New York and Chicago. Out to our east in the University Circle, we have the examples of Cleveland Museum of Art, which I believe is now on the 2nd day of celebrating its 100th anniversary. We have the orchestra, the music settlement, Cleveland Institute of Arts, MoCA, so a whole concentration of long-established arts and culture institutions. It's pretty typical of cities, so-called legacy cities like Cleveland. What's changed over the last few decades is that supporting organizations like the Cleveland Foundation across the street, also supporting arts and culture in neighborhoods, which is not something that they did in the much earlier stages of supporting arts and culture. And in case of the Cleveland Foundation, they supported the Community Partnership for Arts and Culture. It staged a couple of conferences here in Cleveland back in the 90s, talking about arts in the Rust Belt. We don't like to use the Rust Belt anymore, but in legacy cities like Cleveland, they forged a partnership and supported it since then to provide support for the arts and culture outside of the major institutions in areas like Playhouse Square and University Circle. Also, Clevelanders have supported, not once now, but twice, a tax or whatever you want to call it, a fee charged on cigarettes to support the arts, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, which has supported many of the long-standing institutions, but they've also supported groups, including the ones you're going to hear about in a moment, sitting right in front of me, from 3 other neighborhoods. So I think that marks Cleveland as one of the leading cities to provide public support, continuing public support, and this includes for the next decade in the second round, an organization that provides grants and other funding support for both individuals and organizations. You'll probably hear mention of that in the other speakers' presentations. Nationally, we have the National Endowment for the Arts. National Endowment for the Arts, as Jenny will probably mention, came to Cleveland and sang the praises of Gordon Square as a leading example of neighborhood-based arts and culture. It's also spawned Art Place America, a national organization that gives competitive funding around the country to innovative and major projects. So we're going to hear about awards in North Collinwood and in St. Clair Superior. You'll be hearing about that, I'm sure, in their presentations. I'm going to quote from Rip Rapson, who's head of the Kresge Foundation Detroit. Detroit, for all its trouble and all its problems, has spawned the arts in many innovative ways. One of the greatest but saddest is the Heidelberg Project. People have been to Detroit, seen the Heidelberg Project, Tyree Guyton's innovative way of decorating abandoned houses now for many, many years with a lot of support. Sad to say, I think in the last 2 years, 9 of his buildings have been burned down by arsonists, as yet to be found. But despite the hardships in Detroit fashion, as the city slogan says, we'll rise from the ashes, he's still at it, and the city is providing support as well as the Kresge Foundation. And Rip's quotation from a recent article in Shelter Forces: arts and culture can contribute in a central material way to solving some of the most difficult problems that communities face. And certainly Detroit, just coming out of bankruptcy, certainly epitomizes legacy cities with a host of problems, and nevertheless they managed to save the artwork in their Detroit Institute of Arts that at one point might have been vulnerable to a sale, a fire sale of its contents, and also has spawned, again, housing for artists and community-based artworks in many of its most devastated neighborhoods. So if this can work in Detroit, it can work everywhere and anywhere. Shelter Force magazine, speaking of Shelter Force, is currently conducting a survey, and they are asking the question which we have answered in Cleveland for a long time: do you see a role for arts and culture in community development? And I assume they will receive a lot of positive responses from organizations like the one you're going to hear from today, saying, of course, yes. So let me talk about Tremont a bit from my research in its now long history. I wrote a chapter in my book on artists and the arts. Its arts heritage goes way back again, just like those major institutions I mentioned. The many churches of Tremont have long had religious and sacred art in those churches. If you've ever been to them, or if you haven't, you might want to take a look at the pretty amazing artwork in its many churches for many different faiths and cultures. Also, Tremont, which has had 5 different names in its history, also has had 3 firsts. 2 of them are the first university in Cleveland, Cleveland University, which lasted all 2 years, but spawned names like College Avenue and Professor over in Tremont. It also lays claim to having the first dog park in Cleveland, down at Clark Field. And in 1893, the Olneys, the wife of whom was the widow of one of the first industrialists in Tremont, who had moved his factory from Connecticut to Cleveland and Tremont, she and her husband opened the first public art gallery in Cleveland, which on West 14th Street is now, after being long abandoned, being converted into Constantino's Grocery. It should be opening, I believe, later this year. But when they passed on and the art gallery closed in 1904, the collection, their own private collection, became the basis for the Oberlin College's Allen Memorial Art Museum. So if you have been out there, or you haven't, and go out there, it goes back to the Olneys and Tremont in the late 19th century as the basis for that collection. So there's a history to art in Tremont, or as it was originally called, Cleveland Heights, and then University Heights, and then Lincoln Heights, and then the South Side, and even today the South Side to many, but Tremont. So I'm going to talk a bit about how the arts has influenced the revival of Tremont, particularly from its hardest times. And the history seems to start with artists who took up roots in the warehouse district in downtown Cleveland when it was down and out, and there were a lot of abandoned buildings and empty lofts. And as has happened in many cities in the United States and around the world, the artists simply moved in and converted them to art living spaces. Eventually, as others discovered the warehouse district, as the warehouse district came to be a more popular destination, as developers arrived to actually buy those buildings and convert them as they've done over time, the artists, as has often happened, were pushed out, both by rents and legalization of their workspace. So many of them crossed the river, and they, quote, discovered Tremont, and not exactly discovered it, but found that it was convenient to downtown, The rents were cheap, the spaces maybe weren't the greatest, but eventually a trickle became more of a strong wave of artists who moved into Tremont, along with a lawyer, Jean Brandt, graduate of Cleveland Marshall College of Law, who opened her law office in Tremont in 1987. Her parents had been Tremonters, or now as they're called, Tree Monsters, and she decided to move her office, rediscover her roots, opened her law office, and then in 1990 opened an art gallery in her law office, and then in 1993, along with others, initiated the Tremont Art Walk. And that was modeled on the art walk that had begun in Little Italy and continues. In fact, last weekend it was their first summer art walk. The idea being to attract visitors and, of course, buyers of the arts by staging, in their case, every second Friday, an art walk, and the artwork being displayed both in galleries and in a lot of the businesses, otherwise known as bars and restaurants. That began to attract people once they could figure out where Tremont was and how to get there, which often posed something of a challenge. And eventually that increasingly became the reason for the destination of visitors. So in my book, I quote from a Plain Dealer article several years after the art walk began. This is July of 2000, and the title of the article was "Arts and Nightlife Booming in a Neighborhood of Sharp Contrast." This is after Tremont underwent tremendous difficulties, including a landlord burning buildings down in the neighborhood to collect the insurance, wild dog packs roaming through deserted streets, and the Plain Dealer quoting an article that Tremont was the white South Bronx in the 1970s, emulating New York, and the abandonment of many buildings in the South Bronx. Well, this is now several years later, and the reporter reports about Jean Brandt's gallery, the art walk, art events, which I'll mention in a moment. The most interesting thing about Tremont is the way this once declining Cleveland neighborhood has rebounded by mixing its art and nightlife. You will find paintings where you would expect to find them in one of the neighborhood's 7 art galleries, but there is just as much art hanging on the walls of Tremont's bars and restaurants. You will find the artists hanging out on the streets, in the taverns, plying their trade, or talking about it. So the combination of an organized art walk, the support of organizations like Tremont West Development Corporation, and reporting like that in the Plain Dealer began to contribute to, I think, what most people would see as the revitalization of Tremont, which we could talk about later. In 1991, Arts Renaissance Tremont began. That's a annual program of performance art and lectures, and it's done in the Pilgrim Congregational Church in their auditorium. Highly recommended, and certainly an institution that's contributed a lot. The first church in Tremont going back to the 1850s. The Tremont Art Walk, that's why that's up there on the board, was discontinued after more than 2 decades earlier this year, and its successor emerged last month as the Tremont, Walkabout Tremont. I've got brochures over there if you're interested. So it continues the tradition of monthly events in the second Friday, but it's not limited to art galleries. And arguably, there are fewer art galleries in Tremont. There are few artists, perhaps because of the rise in real estate values and prices that have characterized Tremont in more recent years. Tremont West Development Corporation is one of the organizations supporting it, so whatever you think about the status of arts in Tremont or artists, there is still an event, a monthly event that will continue that tradition. A notable example of the loss of an artist and art gallery was the Asterisk Gallery right across from Tremont West Development Corporation's office. Kind of an interesting history to the building. It had many different uses before it became an art gallery. He was attracted to Tremont when his mother, an antique dealer, took him on one of those art walks early in his life, and he was attracted to Tremont. Unfortunately, he said eventually it became a real burden and not a viable business venture. So Dana Depew, the owner, has been, I believe, exhibiting his work over on West 78th Street in Detroit Shoreline, not in Tremont these days. But one of the stalwarts of the art history or art and culture history in Tremont. 1999, they began the Tremont Arts and Cultural Festival that occurs every September. 2002, they began Arts in August. These events being supported by a whole lot of organizations. And one of the supports for Arts in August are the restaurants, because the arts events clearly contributed to the veritable explosion of restaurants as a feature of Tremont. Every Tuesday, today it's Crust Pizza. They contribute 10% of their sales to support Arts in August. So not too late today to run over to Crust and buy something to eat and support Arts in August. 2006, at the Literary Cafe on Friday nights, the pretentious Tremont Artists Club began. So they began doing caricature drawings of visitors to the Literary Cafe. I don't know if people have been the subject of any of those. Walter, were you drawn? Oh, you haven't? Too bad. I think there's still the opportunity to do that. So in one way or another, through formal programs or informal events like the Pretentious Artists gatherings. A lot of art. In my book, I quoted one of the more recent events about Tremont by an artist, but not displayed in Tremont. And that was the show by an artist named Tom Rose. He presented a program on the houses, or an exhibit on the houses of Tremont at the Harris Stanton Gallery last fall. And then in his statement about the exhibit, he said the following: "So many images from my drawings are inspired by the industrial history of Cleveland's Smoky Flats, where steel mills, chemical plants, railroads, and river-traveling ore boats compete for attention. On the bluffs overlooking this laboring soup, the workers' cottages built by the sweat of early immigrants are the scenes that command my attention." So, of course, there was a lot of folk art by the many immigrants who gravitated to Tremont in the late 19th century for work in the mills and factories and the flats, all kinds of immigrant groups. Many of the figures in the cultural gardens in Cleveland represent the groups that ended up in Tremont, like the Germans, the Irish, the Slovaks, the Poles, the Russians, the Greeks, also represented, of course, today by the churches that they founded. So Tremont certainly has a long history, longer than most in terms of its history, 197 years this year, but also by the more recent decades and the work of community organizations like Tremont West Development and others. I'm going to finish by talking about the latest example of community arts, and that's something called the Tremont Community Mural Project. Earlier this year, under the direction of the artist-in-resident Angelica Pozzo, they began a project to involve residents, and I think this is typical of community-based arts and culture efforts, to get residents involved. And literally they have, as I understand it, gotten 450 or more Tremont residents to participate in this project, which is to do a mural which will be in the pagoda in the middle of Lincoln Park, a central location in Tremont. And the idea was to have residents do ceramic tiles, because Angelica Pozzo, who's long a Tremont resident, is a nationally recognized ceramic artist, and also to incorporate in the mural pictures or photos imposed on the tiles of some of the history of Tremont, it having such a rich history. So that's an example of folks working on it. And here's a little piece of the ceramic tile which they assembled Sunday. And if you are not doing anything else, on June 21st at 6 o'clock as the Tremont Farmers Market ends, they'll be unveiling the Tremont community tile to the public and to the residents of Tremont. I think it is an example of one of the leading features of this effort in Cleveland neighborhoods to both promote arts, certainly to bring in visitors, but also to involve residents. And I think Tremont is an outstanding example of success in that regard. So with that, I'm going to end and turn it over to Kathy to introduce our panel of speakers from 3 other Cleveland neighborhoods.
Thank you, Dennis. I think I'm going to introduce all 3 of you, and then you can each come up in turn. And I don't know if you picked up an agenda, but there are also bios over there on the registration table, and there are question cards. So as people are speaking, if you think of questions, you should write them down, and then we're going to bring everybody back up at the end to answer questions. So our first presenter is going to be Jenny Spencer. And Jenny is the managing director of the Detroit Shoreway Community Development Organization. Since 1973, DSCDO has worked to catalyze the physical and social development of the Detroit Shoreway neighborhood on Cleveland's near west side. Jenny holds a master's degree in public policy and urban planning from the Harvard Kennedy School, my alma mater, and is an economic development finance professional with a certification from the National Development Council. Jenny, I'm so excited to have Jenny here. I just have to say, because she grew up next to me. She was my next door neighbor in Shaker Heights. Well, I should say she was a child, I was an adult, but her family lived next door to us, and I've just loved watching the path that Jenny has taken, and her mom, Flo, is here. And we have another Shaker Heights grad. But anyway, so Jenny has worked at Detroit Shoreway as the project manager for the Gordon Square Arts District from 2008 to 2012. She then moved to Team Neo, where she worked for a while and served as the regional, what did you do there? The Regional Economic Development Organization in Cleveland. And then she went back to Detroit Shoreway, and she is now the managing director. And Jenny was also a Peace Corps volunteer in Paraguay and is fluent in Spanish, and now she lives with her husband Mario in Detroit Shoreway's Franklin Boulevard Historic District. Our next presenter will be Michael Fleming, another friend. So Michael is the executive director of the St. Clair Superior Development Corporation, and he had worked for almost 10 years as a chef in Boston, Miami Beach, and Madrid, Spain. And he moved back to Cleveland to be part of the city's revival. He has since worked in both private and nonprofit development. He earned his master's degree in urban planning, design, and development right here at the Levin College at Cleveland State before joining the St. Clair Superior Development Corporation as its executive director. And for any of you who've been watching that neighborhood, I think Mike has really already, in the short time he's been there, significantly transformed the neighborhood. He introduced an urban grazing program using sheep to maintain vacant land at a fraction of the cost of mowing, a program which has garnered national attention. He's currently working on Upcycle St. Clair, a comprehensive based strategy, showing how creative reuse can lift an entire neighborhood. And Upcycle St. Clair is a 2013 winner of the National Art Place America Grant. And our third speaker, but certainly not least, will be Brian Friedman, who is the Executive Director of Northeast Shores Development Corporation. He's been there for over 10 years and has developed and implemented programs to increase commercial and residential investment in the neighborhood. One of the more significant initiatives of Northeast Shores is the Waterloo Business District, which is being developed into a regional arts and entertainment district. Northeast Shores recently received over $9 million in public and philanthropic support, which is an unbelievable accomplishment, to move this initiative forward. And Northeast Shores is another neighborhood that, if you've been there recently, has been completely transformed. Not only the streetscape project, the streetscape improvements, but everything is really coming together in that neighborhood. He's increased home ownership and investment, and done a lot of creative placemaking, drawing recognition from across the country. So Brian is a graduate of the College of Worcester and the Ohio State University, and is a founding board member of Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, the Lakeshore Intergenerational School, and an active board member of Villa Angeles St. Joe's High School. So we'll start with Jenny, and then we'll go to Michael, and then Dwight.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Spencer. I'm so glad to be here today. And I actually wanted to start with a video break. So I'm looking at Molly in the back, who's going to show a brief video about 7 minutes, which kind of encapsulates 40 years of Detroit Shore Way.
As recently as 1970, this neighborhood had the highest rate of people who walked to work in the state of Ohio. With the closure of major employers and manufacturing base like Eveready Battery and Westinghouse, put the neighborhood into tailspin.
Problem was industry leaving the town, going internationally, going other places. And the cities all over were concerned about how to keep jobs in the cities.
During the 1970s, it was a difficult time. People were starting to accumulate some wealth. The baby boomers were having families. People started to leave our neighborhood. And then when busing occurred in the late 70s, you had a lot of white flight. And not only white flight, but the minority community in this neighborhood, the people who had wealth, the middle income, Hispanics and African Americans, they left too.
And by 1990, things had gotten really bad. The poverty rate was 40%. The sales price of a single family home was only $16,000.
Those challenges seem overwhelming for groups of people who transitioned out of the community. But there's always been a core group of people who have had faith and a passion for the community.
At one time, Detroit Avenue, the heart of our commercial district, was lined with vacant storefronts and boarded up storefronts. Detroit Shoreway really helped to fuel the boom on Detroit Avenue by buying many of these problem buildings, bringing millions of dollars in renovation to Detroit Avenue, and recruiting new businesses to the neighborhood.
It's the Gordon Square Arcade, when it was owned by developers who let it literally fall apart, and this tiny community organization, Detroit Shoreway, in 1978 deciding, well, let's try to buy that building, and they did.
You know, if it wasn't for a bold move by Father Marino Frascati, who went to his religious order and said, can I borrow $125,000 to save the Gordon Square Arcade? The city was going to demolish it. And it was because of his love for this neighborhood that made that possible.
There's been a member of the Creation family on our board since our founding, and our faith-based partners have been with us since the beginning and are with us still today, from Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church, St. Coleman, St. Luke's Episcopal. The Zone family has been leaders of our neighborhood for 4 generations. Michael Zone was the councilman from 1960 to 1974. When Michael passed away, his wife Mary took over as our city council representative, and Matt carries on the legacy of his parents today in serving our neighborhood.
We had Cleveland Public Theater here, and Near West Theater was getting ready to move into our neighborhood and build a new theater, and we had the Capitol Theater. It was closed down, it was run down, we didn't know how we were going to renovate it, but we knew that if we could, based upon those three anchor institutions, that we could reinvigorate this commercial district.
I wish I could transplant what is happening in Gordon Square all around the country, because not only are they engaging their own artists and their own artistic ethos, but they are transforming a neighborhood, a community. And that kind of model is what we want to highlight and showcase and bring all across the country to every community that we can.
And just to see the neighborhood come back to life little by little, it's an amazing thing for me to be able to tell my children, this is what it used to be like, and this is what it is now.
It's a great combination of a good arts project with economic development. We got $6 million, believe it or not, from the city of Cleveland to do the streetscape, which is pretty impressive.
Since 2006, there have been 35 new businesses on Detroit Avenue as a part of this renaissance in the Gordon Square Arts District. The Lorraine Avenue Antiques District is not only a destination nationally, but people come from all over the world to shop at the unique concentration of antique dealers on Lorraine, including the Bijou, Sweet Lorraine, and Lorraine Furniture Gallery.
And frankly, they've become the vanguard for community development, creating, innovating, really making a great place for people to live, work, play.
But really working with the residents to plan for the neighborhood, and that's something they've done a great job of, organizing the community in the different areas, creating a vision that comes from the community up, and then working that plan.
It's not done from a top down, it's done by engaging the community, and that's what I see as the greatest benefit.
Since our founding 40 years ago, residents have been the foundation of our organization, our network of block clubs, our community leaders. Our governance model is unique in that members are required to be from the neighborhood. Neighborhood residents, businesses, and institutions, churches and social service agencies must come from our neighborhood.
We're going to celebrate 40 years. They've been there a long time, and they are the one really helped me to get my building together and to do a lot of work here.
The diversity that we have now may be in some ways ethnic diversity, but it's income diversity, it's racial diversity, it's cultural diversity, all which rather than hinders the development lends to the strength of the neighborhood.
We really have a cultural haven where, within these 2 blocks, I can probably name 5, 6 nationalities.
I'm really proud of the fact that as part of our renaissance, we provided housing for people of all income levels. The stability of handling only 4 executive directors in 40 years, 4 board presidents, and 6 city council representatives. This is a very stable organization, and that's been a big factor in our success. Partnerships with Eco City Cleveland led to the foundation of the Cleveland Eco Village in 1998. Everybody's talking about green building today, but 15 years ago they weren't. And the Cleveland Eco Village helped to make sustainability an important part of Cleveland's renaissance.
There are all sorts of young professionals, people newly to Cleveland, that are looking at Battery Park, that are looking at some of the lakefront residential options, that are looking at some of the rehabs and other parts of the Detroit Shore neighborhood and saying, this is a place where I want to live. This is a place that has community.
I can see the future of this place gonna be blooming more, much better than they are today.
I hope that it stays on the track, that there's a lot of things available for the small businesses and young people to come. I know on my street just this year, 4th of July, going down the street, there were 6 or 7 houses that had a lot of young people out having barbecues, and I haven't seen that for 25 years.
It's been really a steady focus and clear about how to create a mixed income neighborhood that brings people from all the different constituencies to the neighborhood. And Detroit Shoreway has maintained their vision. They knew what they wanted to do with the Gordon Square Arts District. the eco-village, and they've maintained that over the past 20 plus years to really make it a place where people want to come live, work, and play.
Thank you, Molly. So I'm going to spend the remainder of the time I have just to show some slides of Gordon Square Arts District. And in regards to that video, you can imagine that as a staff member at Detroit Shoreway, I feel a great sense of legacy. And I think everyone on staff feels that we're part of a multi-generational push to evolve the neighborhood and really respecting the work, the amazing work that came before us and where we are now in the neighborhood's history. So Gordon Square Arts District, it's really the downtown of the Detroit Shoreway neighborhood. So I would love to very quickly just see a show of hands of who has been to Gordon Square. Most people, so you know where it is. It's about 2.5 miles west of here. It's on a bluff, essentially a bluff overlooking Lake Erie. The larger Detroit Shoreway neighborhood runs from West 45th Street to West 85th Street and from Lake Erie to Interstate 90. That's our whole service area. But what Gordon Square means to our neighborhood is that it is where everyone really does the work of, or just daily life. It's where people convene for entertainment, for shopping, for errands. It is the downtown of the Detroit Shoreway neighborhood. So while it has become a regional attraction, part of our development vision is for it to serve the neighborhood as well. One more note about the Detroit Shoreway neighborhood. We are one of the most diverse in the city of Cleveland. We are very proud of that. Our population is around 12,000 residents. We have about 50% white population, 25% African American, 25% Latino. We also have refugee and immigrant populations from Asia. We do struggle in our neighborhood. We have about a 35% poverty rate, and median income in neighborhood-wide it stands at $23,000. So we're very much a neighborhood in transition. So I want you to take a good look at this image here for a moment, because I'm going to change to the next image of the same building. This was in the video, but just the contrast of how far we've come in a snapshot in time. So this is sort of the origin story of Detroit Shoreway that was captured a bit in the video. But this building is the arcade building at West 65th and Detroit. And in 1979, the parapet wall of this building literally came crashing down onto West 65th Street. It crushed the marquee of the Capitol Theater and really represented the low point, I think, spiritually and also in terms of economic development and investment of the neighborhood. And the building was owned by a disreputable owner. The city threatened it with demolition. It was condemned. And at that point, the fledgling Detroit Shoreway Community Development Organization set out to preserve this building, believing that if this building were not saved, it would not be possible to bring the neighborhood back. And that premonition has very much come true. If you have been to Gordon Square, so you know that really that sense of place that's created at West 65th and Detroit with that historic fabric is so important. And in fact, one of my favorite fun facts about the neighborhood is that corner there at 65th and Detroit is one of only 2 corners in the entire city of Cleveland, with all 4 of its pre-World War II original buildings still intact. The other corner is East 55th and Broadway in Slavic Village. So that forward thinking, knowing that if you didn't save this building, there wouldn't be a basis for rebirth. And the building is home to the Capitol Theater. So the story of, I skipped ahead. The story of the Gordon Square Arts District was told a little bit in the video, but essentially it was a partnership between 3 non-for-profit organizations. Conversations began in 2002, and then in 2006 a formal partnership was established between Detroit Shoreway as owner of the Capitol Theater, Near West Theater, which is a community theater, and Cleveland Public Theater, which is an avant-garde theater. And one thing that was very unique about this partnership was a document was forged called the Memorandum of Understanding, which essentially set forth how the proceeds of the capital campaign would be distributed. So it was a $30 million capital campaign, and these were the components of the campaign. They were to be the renovation of the Capitol Movie Theater, the renovation of Cleveland Public Theater, construction of a new home for Near West Theater, the Detroit Avenue Streetscape, which was a City of Cleveland funded project and parking improvements. So that added up to the 30 million total. And this document, actually, it was a unique document that was prepared to really govern how were these three independent organizations going to govern themselves and going to come to agreement about how to raise funds and how to distribute funds amongst themselves. The campaign was meant to be maybe a 3-4 year campaign. It was launched in 2006. The Great Recession happened, and in fact, what happened was the campaign finished in 2014. So the $30 million goal was reached in 2014. So in terms of impact, one thing that's really exciting is obviously economic development. So 80 new businesses have opened in Gordon Square since 2006. A lot of those businesses are actually in 78th Street Studios. Professor Keating mentioned 78th Street Studios. If you have not been there, it is the largest indoor arts walk in Northeast Ohio. It was originally the home of the Baker Electric Car Company. Later it was home to American Greetings Creative Studios. It was purchased by a gentleman named Dan Bush, who had a vision for creating really a space for artists to have studio space. And now they're open the third Friday of every month. It's a fabulous experience. I highly recommend it. And then just, basically what our neighborhood has is we're anchored by Gordon Square and also the lakefront. And so by extension, I think those two key assets, we're experiencing nearly $500 million of development currently underway in the neighborhood. So in terms of what's next in Gordon Square, I mentioned that this $30 million capital campaign concluded in 2014. A really terrific plan, the Gordon Square Arts District Community Master Plan, was approved by the City of Cleveland Planning Commission in December 2014, which set forth a roadmap for the future of this part of the neighborhood, which again is really the primary commercial corridor of Detroit Shoreway. And part of the vision calls for connecting the nodes of energy and the nodes of investment along Detroit. So there are a lot of gaps. There are a lot of spots where as you move along Detroit Avenue, the energy dissipates. There's still a lot of surface parking lots. And so part of the plan calls for connectivity and really creating an arts corridor. And that connectivity is also about the lake. There are a lot of people who come to the neighborhood who don't realize if you're at 65th in Detroit, you have 3 tunnels now that will connect you directly to the beach. One at 65th, one at 76th. Those are both pedestrian and bike tunnels. And then a third tunnel recently opened at West 73rd Street that is for people, pedestrians, bikes, and cars as well. So just to conclude my slides, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A, one thing I really want to highlight about Gordon Square is that truly a core competency is the performing arts. So we have this magical place in 78th Street Studios, but really what we have is a performing arts district. And that's really some of the indigenous strengths of the district. So these are just some images of performing arts. This is an image from the Gordon Square Fall Fest. Actually, it's going to become a little bit later date this year, so save the date for December 3rd. It's going to be a holiday-oriented performing arts festival in Gordon Square. We have Day of the Dead in our neighborhood, which is hosted and curated by Cleveland Public Theater. So really what we're interested in doing is bringing the art outside, the performing arts outside the walls of our theaters and into our streets in Gordon Square as we evolve it to its next phase. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael Fleming, Executive Director for St. Clair Superior Development Corporation. I know many of the faces in the crowd. Just FYI, we do have a computer screen up here. This is great. Okay, I thought that was my teleprompter over there, so I was going to be like squinting as I presented everything to you. So St. Clair Superior Development, for anybody who is not aware, is the area stretching from the Inner Belt out to Martin Luther King, everything north of Payne Superior up to the lake. I like to point out that this is a very interesting area for a lot of reasons because of some of the diversity that I'll go into. What's really interesting to me, though, is that it has 6.5 miles of shoreline that nobody in the neighborhood seems to really realize. Something that would add a lot of value to, and I think, Jenny, you kind of see this too, where there's a shoreway, there's a railroad, and of course there's the bluffs that you talked about that keep everybody from actually accessing the water, even though there's lovely parks that are there. It's one of the things that we struggle with too. This will be interesting for everybody because these three neighborhoods, I think you guys have been at this so successfully for so long. We're like really kind of newcomers at this and are being very experimental right now. And when we get to Brian, you're going to see just how like when you are deep, thorough, and very thoughtful about the different interventions that you're doing and study it, the kind of results that you get. So it's like three different parts of the spectrum. Our area close to downtown, close to University Circle, this seems like these would be, as you know, two of the most two of the largest centers of employment in Northeast Ohio, or the largest centers of employment in Northeast Ohio. This would be a better off neighborhood, but it's 83% low to moderate income, which I thought was interesting. Yours, would you say 35% LMI? The diversity I mentioned before, there's 23 languages or dialects that are spoken in the St. Clair Superior neighborhood. Stretches from Asiatown, where we've got Vietnamese and Chinese and Korean, among others. There's a series of Eastern European neighborhoods, African American, there's Latino, and then we also have some refugee populations, so we probably have some more similarities to talk about, Jenny. It's diverse economically too, so we have everything north of St. Clair is, you know, it's all warehouses and former industry, some current industry, and it also has, I'm sorry, the high-tech office like you see at Tyler Village here at East 36 in Asiatown. We as an organization have been using the arts for quite some time as a way to engage people. So in order to celebrate the Chinese New Year, we've been doing the Year of the Zodiac. You guys will see these statues. You'll see them actually probably within this building. There's one right there. They sneak up on you, so be careful. So we do, this is from the Year of the Dragon. I'm actually a dragon, anyone born in the year 76 or any sort of 12-year increment thereof. These would be all around Asiatown, all around Cleveland in some respects, and it's artists that would create these, and we would auction them off at the end of the year. And it's a great project for sure, but it sort of led into how we want to use the arts for thinking through our neighborhood. And we started doing projects like this, which seems really straightforward. It's a marketing and branding initiative for St. Clair. St. Clair's a very long street, so we really wanted to kind of reclaim it, and part of the reason behind that thought process is if I say, let's go get a drink at West 25th, you guys know exactly where on West 25th I'm talking about. Even though West 25th is a very, very long street, most people are going to be thinking of Ohio City. And so we wanted to, when people say St. Clair, we wanted them to be thinking around the St. Clair and East 55th neighborhood, where we have a lot of those historic buildings like Jenny has over in Detroit Shoreway still in place, still intact. But what makes this interesting is that it asks questions for people. So this is an example of creative placemaking, as defined by Art Place America's Jamie Bennett. It's art that is used for a social purpose. So it has a sort of outcome that is coming from it. Rather than just enjoying the public art like we do with the statues, there is this involvement that we engage residents of the community. In this case, we were asking what is their favorite story about the neighborhood or tradition, or what do they want to see here? Who's their favorite person and why, or describe yourself? All great questions that we brought people out throughout the summer of 2013 to sort of answer on the back of these through small events. And we would get these fantastic answers like Patrice, she sees the beauty in everybody, which I think is powerful because I don't know who Patrice is, but I know that she lives in this neighborhood in St. Clair Superior, and there's a beauty to that. Or when I was a kid, I felt like I had 50 moms and dads and 250 brothers and sisters, Slovenian, African American, Puerto Rican, Appalachian, one big family. And this always gives me the chills when I read it, even though I know it's probably Councilman Simperman that wrote it. But what's cool about that is that we've then taken these things and plastered them on different buildings in the neighborhood. So these are murals now in our neighborhood, so people get to see their own responses right there on storefronts that have been boarded up, on walls like you just saw, in this beautiful mural right here on the side of the Slovenian National Home. And what's interesting even beyond that too is that we were able to distill some of the answers that people gave us. A lot of people were telling us that they really wanted access to fresh and whole produce or grocery stores. And we knew from just basic studies that this is a food desert east of 55th. In fact, it's one of the worst food deserts in Cuyahoga County. So it led to the discussion of the Hub 55 project, which was already being reimagined for multi-tenant use, and it's shifted it so that it will actually have a healthy food access component to it rather than just pure retail. So the numbers up there, there's a cafe at number 9, a brewery that's opening, and number 3 is going to be a marketplace, originally conceived as more of a West Side Market style thing. And the cafe is already in place. Cafe 55 is excellent if you guys can make it over there at 55th. And the brewery is brewing. They should be doing the opening, soft opening on the 29th of this month. And then the marketplace, again, will be, we've understood, as we did a market study, we realized we don't have the foot traffic just yet to support a full-on West Side Market style marketplace, multi-vendor type of thing. So instead, we're focused on added value food production, much like the Chelsea Market in New York City, which was creameries and bakeries doing wholesale that later led to a lot of pedestrians coming through, buying from them, and it turned into a shopping experience. Another way that we've been using the arts, we started looking around in the neighborhood to see what people were really doing, and there was a lot of upcycling going on. And upcycling, just for anybody who's not familiar with it, is different than recycling. Recycling is using plastic for plastic. Downcycling is downgrading something from one grade of plastic or a metal to a lower one for a different industrial use. Upcycling is adding value to something where it wasn't before. And in our situation, we're trying to, in part, remove things, pull things from the cycle of going into landfill. So in this situation, you see a bottle that's turned into these beautiful plastic flowers. Boy, this really moves fast. You see this necklace that's made from washers. Jenny was wearing one, so she was proudly displaying. It was a modeling show, you guys didn't know, but or these Sherry Renee magazine-made purses, which can sell for hundreds of dollars. These were all being produced in our neighborhood, and it was something that was really interesting to us, like how do you capture that? It happens on a scale, though, too, so you can see that there's furniture made from a piece of Cleveland, which is now defunct, but they also spawned Rust Belt Reclamation, that is turning old buildings that have been deconstructed into furniture, into new creations, and again, new value. So we thought that was something that is worth teaching. You know, it's an art, it's crafting, but it's worth teaching people in the community. In Cleveland, where we're losing population, we are, by that very nature, going to have extra stuff. So if we teach people to use that stuff and to create value out of that stuff instead of to just look at it as refuse, then you're showing people that their surroundings, they're able to take ownership over that. So the Upcycle Parts Shop was is the forefront of that. It's a storefront that is an aggregator of materials that would otherwise find their way into the waste stream. And so the example that I like to use, so this is the inside of not our Upcycle Parts Shop, but a similar one in Durham. It's basically an art supply store that is pulling together non-toxic materials, often from some of the manufacturers in our very neighborhood. And what's interesting about it is that if you have a lot of a certain material, everybody starts to realize that it's a resource. An example I like to give is that if there's like 2 wine corks, there's not a lot that you can do with it. But if I presented you with 1,000 wine corks, everybody starts to see, oh, this is a material that I could make use of and turn into a floor mat, cork board, or any number of other things. So this store is open to the community. It's become a really great social engagement piece because we have community members coming there all the time who are crafting daily with the employees of the parts shop. But it also reaches out into the community and does crafting in different parts at events like the Cleveland Flea. They're doing things with St. Luke's Point and with businesses alike throughout the community, teaching people how to make those flowers again. And what's cool is that those flowers have now become, they were already being sold at places like the Cleveland Flea and night markets for about $5 a stem. We've gotten to the point where residents are now making these for us, and they get a big portion, 3/4 of the actual income from these go to the residents who are preparing them because we couldn't manufacture them fast enough, and frankly, they make them better. As you can see here, these flowers are gorgeous, and this is like the flower 2.0 from the original version that we had. And it's creating value for people in the community, and that's, in an area with a lot of fixed income, that's a big deal to create access to more economy. This conversation about upcycling spurred a lot of questions or conversations, and one of them was with Kent State University's Urban Design School and their architecture program on the main campus. So we looked at a house that was vacant, abandoned, vandalized, and the students did all the design work for a semester and all the build work for a summer, which brought down the overall cost of renovating the building, which is really important in a neighborhood with zero comps. So it's hard for us to justify putting $50,000 into a house when it's worth $30,000 when you're done. So if we can figure out ways to buy that down, that's really key. And upcycling and frankly free student labor is one way to do that. So the students spent a summer designing and building this and doing all the work here. And this is a rendering, but it really does look like this. It's using all sorts of upcycled materials on the interior to create this one open space from what was a 2-unit apartment building. And when we talk about arts and culture, so we talked about upcycling and some of the other strategies, creative placemaking, but we really are focused on culture in our neighborhood too because of the diversity that I outlined before. So if anybody can pronounce this, it's Kurentovanje. It is the Slovenian festival of their pagan god of fertility, the current. And we focus on this because if you guys are familiar with Cleveland history, you know that Slovenian history is really tied to it. There's 90,000 Slovenians in Northeast Ohio, more than any place outside of Ljubljana. And we have the largest Slovenian parish outside of Ljubljana is in this neighborhood, St. Vitus. And so we wanted to focus on that as sort of a key for attracting people to the neighborhood, using that historic culture. And we kind of keyed in on this just because it was so fascinating. It's this, again, the god of fertility, whose job it is to stomp away winter and welcome spring. This is me leading a team of them prepping for the parade. And the parade is a pre-Lenten festival, which in Cleveland means the dead of winter. So we have, literally 2 years ago, it was 6 inches of snow. And we still had several thousand people show up for this event, which is incredible. Other ways we like to use culture, Night Market Cleveland has been a wild success for really taking advantage of all the unique cultures that we have in the neighborhood. This again was a response to what people in the community had been asking for though. So we did, is Nick still in the audience? There's a student from CSU who actually did a engagement piece, like doing some storytelling with people from the Asian community, and they all were indicating that they wanted to see a night market, which is a very common East Asian nighttime shopping experience. So we created this in partnership with the campus district, really to feature all the different Asian businesses in the community and the artists in the community, and we made it so that anybody who was from the community and was running a tent didn't pay to be there. They didn't pay for their tent, they didn't pay for their table, so that it made sure that the in-district people benefited the most from it first, so that all of the money that we could see coming in from this event would stay within the community. And it's attracted thousands of people. The first event actually was 5,000 people, and we were quite overwhelmed. The second event was 10,000, and then it went up from there, I think topping out at over 20,000 for the final event. It will be starting again the last Friday of this month, last Friday of every month through the summer, so June through September. If you guys want to attend, it's over on Rockwell, just between St. Clair and Superior. This was really interesting to us because we were creating so much value. The different markets, we helped start the Cleveland Flea as well, and we were seeing that we could attract thousands and thousands of people to the community with a lot of money. We wanted to make sure that that if people aren't benefiting from these events in our community, then we're not doing it right. We knew that. So if we could make sure that even if they're not attending the event, that they are garnering something from it also, then that's a modicum of success. So we created Hatch St. Clair, and it's sort of like 2 prongs. The first prong is there are all these great existing businesses. Are they benefiting from the fact that we're bringing all these people into the community? So examples like Shelley's Diner on St. Clair or Osmond's Meats, which gets best Slovenian sausage year after year, are they reaping any benefits from this? And so we have small grants and business assistance to help them reach new markets, the markets that we're bringing in. But then also we wanted to start new businesses. So any member of the community who wants to start something can also receive small grants and business assistance, and a process we call the dolphin tank, which is much like the shark tank, except it's sort of like pushing people in the right direction, very friendly, and so different things, like this is at Mary's House, which is a shelter for battered women. They started creating different products. There's actually a group formed by them called the Black Butterflies, which is making these amazing, they started just learning how to sew, and now they make all sorts of amazing bags, and they, for us in particular, they've gone through this sort of this design process where they're now making these amazing aprons that we sell at different events, and not just things like the Cleveland Flea or night markets, but also within businesses around Christmas time. And another perfect example of this is a flower made by Merino. I showed you those flowers before of 2.0, and this is even greater than that. This is 3.0, where Merino, a regular at Upcycle Parts Shop, said, I can do better than that, and went home with a bunch of the materials, all free, in order to make his own flower, and this beautiful rose is what came out of it. And this, yes, it's really impressive. This is something they could sell for $30, $40, or $50 at an event like night markets, and for somebody on a fixed income, that's a big deal. If you make just a few of these every month, you're going to have a lot of extra cash at the end. And thanks to the support of Burton Morgan Foundation, we're actually extending this to work with teens. We're doing teen entrepreneurship or youth entrepreneurship throughout the community, starting with Lemonade Day, but also working with YOU and other groups to send kids and teach them how to think entrepreneurially, which is something in low-income communities of color is actually a foreign concept in a lot of ways. People, when we started engaging youth around this, they reacted very hesitantly towards entrepreneurship, as their parents often thought of it as hustling or other negative connotations. And as we all know, there's so much foundation support for something like this. And frankly, when it's hard for people to get a job in a community like ours because you need, CNC training or anything like that, if you can start your own business, which we're giving you the opportunity to do, and the markets are being delivered to you, then that's a huge opportunity. And so we're trying to instill that at an early age. And these kids actually got it. So I don't know if you guys have been to the Cleveland Flea, but you know that it's a pretty curated experience. They didn't just make lemonade for their lemonade day. They had all of these fresh squeezed juices that you could mix into your lemonade to have like the perfect blend. So they get it, which is great. And these are just a few of the small businesses that we've started over the last year. And this was just night markets. There's others that are outside of this too, but there were 7 new businesses that were being formed. One story I like to point out is that the Snow Bros, which is East Asian style shaved ice, they made enough money on their first night market to buy a food truck for the second one, which is just absolutely incredible. And that's what we want to see more of. So I will now turn it over to Brian. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I don't want to follow that. I don't follow any of this. Can I just go? I'm Brian Friedman, Executive Director of Northeast Shores. We're going to tell you a little bit about how arts and culture and musicians and a lot of incredible things have really been transforming the Collinwood neighborhood. The quick and easy story that probably many of you have already heard is a story that's very typical of creative placemaking and arts and culture engagement throughout the Rust Belt. Here's a picture of our neighborhood back way back in 1927 when it was at its heyday. Next to at one point, the Collinwood Yards was the #1 shipping location between Cleveland and New York. I'm sorry, Chicago and New York. Not so much anymore. But that is actually where the very seed of actual arts and culture came with. This is a photo of Frankie Yankovic, the Grammy Award-winning polka artist, who actually grew up on Waterloo Road and actually did many of his shows there before he became a world traveling polka artist. But that is actually the kind of the seed, the initial seed of music and culture and whatnot that flows into there. And now today there's a Cleveland-style polka Hall of Fame nearby in the city of Euclid that commemorates what Frankie designed and what came from there. But this is a photo that's all too familiar to all of us. A photo of blight, a photo of what deindustrialization looks like, a photo when, you know, the Rust Belt happens and then we're supposed to apologize because we built the free world and then we had to figure out how to fix things after that. But what does this tell our neighborhood? What does this tell residents? It tells this is not a good place to invest and get out of here as soon as you can. So we really wanted to explore what could happen if you actually take that vacancy and make it an asset for artists with some deliberateness. In the year 2000, Cindy Barber opened the Beachland Ballroom, which is now a world-renowned concert venue, attracting over 60,000 people to the Waterloo Arts and Entertainment District each year. And now we have a vibrant corridor where people come and wonderful things are happening, and it's a great place to come. And I hope you all enjoy it and come out for a variety of activities, including our June 25th Waterloo Arts Fest. But we want to talk a little bit more about what's going on behind the scenes, behind the visitation, behind when you come out and enjoy a pie at Citizen Pie and then go over to the Beachland. What's going on in the neighborhood behind that, and how are we using arts and culture to engage the residents? Like most CDCs in Cleveland, we were a housing-based organization. We were particularly obsessed with home ownership, and we transformed that seed into really making sure that we put now arts and culture at the core of every activity that we now currently do. And that's been a variety of things. We started with little investments 8 or 9 years ago, like putting murals on walls, which is a pretty basic creative placemaking thing that we see happening throughout Cleveland and throughout the nation. We started making sure that arts could actually engage in vacant storefronts. Where here is the Cleveland Rocks Gallery, which is a permanent gallery dedicated to the history of rock and roll, just a few doors from the Beachland Ballroom, to support what happens at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where there's just a very small exhibit about the history of why Cleveland is where that is located. This is a rotating exhibit now, and what used to be a vacant storefront is now a permanent space. And that, come on, go there. We've added more permanent spaces for doing public art and having community events, like this sculpture garden that also has a stage in it towards the east edge of Waterloo. And then we started actually looking more deeply at how arts and culture can make us talk about things that are frankly for a CDC difficult to get residents to engage in. Here you see photos of our rain barrel project that one of our local residents has taken those rain barrels that now all the CDCs get to give out for free, but it's this big blue or white thing you stick in your yard that isn't so attractive. And here Linda Zolden Wood has arranged for a variety of neighborhood artists to paint it and make them a custom piece of art for your yard for all of $400. But actually allows us to engage around stormwater discussion more than how do we get rid of 25 rain barrels each year. But all the while making sure that we focus on making sure that we continue to make housing affordable to artists and people moving in. This is an example of one of our $8,500 houses that we sell to artists and others moving into the neighborhood. This artist was actually sold to this house was sold to an artist that moved to us from New Zealand, which is the farthest flung, but not the only international artist that is relocated to the Callenwood neighborhood. We're finding a lot of these post-foreclosure homes with just an investment of $30,000 or $40,000 can be brought up to life, and frankly don't need us to do a full gut rehab. Some do, but many like this house don't. Here she lives above, and her painting studio is on the first floor of this kind of rediscovered, reused Cleveland double. We've talked about how we can engage youth more more directly in the arts and how we can do more community activities around that, doing everything from now pre-K through high school youth programming. We've done things like converting post-vacant lots, post-demolition lots into actual new pieces of art, new sculpture galleries to make sure that we continue to make place and turn those empty teeth into something that should be something more special. And then we've done things such as making the smallest art gallery in Ohio. That is, yes, a phone booth. That is now a monthly curated art gallery called the Phone Gallery. Currently, every month, Allie Lucasy, who's a neighborhood resident, curates a neighborhood artist to put on an exhibit there. There's a motion detector that when you walk by, it turns on. There's an artist statement, and we stand out there until the cops come and enjoy wine and beer. And then now what we've been doing is making sure that we expand that work and really make sure that a lot of our vacant spaces are rediscovered, not just as housing or not just as something commercial, but to really make sure it's some tactile, intentional experience so the residents can engage in this, and it's not just about visitation of the corridor. Here you see Vale Grossman next to her ceramic studio called Brick that she won in a competitive competition to actually have a custom-built ceramic studio built for her needs. You know, a very tactile experience of making your own ceramics. And on the other side of our district, having the Cleveland Institute of Arts kind of homeless fabric studio get relocated and rediscovered as Praxis, which is now a fiber studio in our corridor that allows people to come in and enjoy the 30 looms that used to be in CIA and engage in that, which is really powerful because for residents in our neighborhood, for all of you, fabric is a piece of our lives. If all of you didn't have an experience with fabric today, you would have been arrested for nudity. So, you know, here's an experience that everybody can participate in because we all have an experience with fabric, even if you're not ready to do a full-blown dye job on a project. At least you have some experience. This is a piece of art that's part of everything that we do. So what we wanted to do with all of these experiences, and what you see many of those were examples of, and I'll show you a few more now, is what we call $10,000 Awesome, which are opportunities where we put $10,000 or less into the hands of artists in our neighborhood to engage intentionally with art, with the community on making art projects. That when you do a number of these at the same time with some intentional deliberateness around it, you end up making a big splash. Sometimes you give $3,500 to an artist and they make a project happen and it doesn't engage the neighborhood, but that's frankly thanks to some incredible national generosity, something that we can afford to hit or strike out at the plate. Sometimes things go much more incredibly than that. Great examples, that is our Vibrant Street Grant Program. So opposite the $5 million streetscape that the city of Cleveland awarded Waterloo, you know, one of the big issues that we've all seen throughout many streetscape projects, and particularly like a Euclid Corridor is a great example of, you know, there's a lot of pain during that construction process. We all avoid all of those orange barrels. Well, what we wanted to explore is what if you made it so incredibly attractive by having artists do arts activities in unconventional spaces. What happens if we make it so we can give the actual merchants a little bit of money to keep them along through the construction time, but also allowed incredible arts experiences to happen in there. So during that project, for example, this is Max Lock Shop, which is the oldest, actually the oldest business on Waterloo that had old TSA locks. Remember we all used to lock our luggage, right? And then now you can't because they have to go through and look at your underwear when you go to take it on a plane. Well, all those locks had to go somewhere, right? So what we did is actually modeled after the Locks of Love program project in France, is actually have people in the neighborhood come in, put their initials or their loved one's initials on it, and then on a chain link fence in the neighborhood, we've now reincorporated it as the Waterloo Locks of Love project. Well, this will provide an opportunity for a lock shop that's very, very dependent on people coming and visiting, that was obviously going to be hurting during that orange barrel crisis, to allow that kind of activity to happen. And thankfully, knock on, it's over now, the streetscape, so I don't have to knock on wood anymore. One of the things that we're really excited about is that actually we did not lose any of our businesses during that streetscape, which, according to at least all the studies we did up and through our streetscape, was the first time that a Cleveland streetscape happened without losing a small business due to closure during that process. Was that only because of our initiative through the vibrancy program? Probably not. There's probably a lot of other factors at play, but I'm sure this didn't hurt. And then this past year, isn't there one that, no? Then this past year we did a year of health. How can we ask neighborhood artists to engage the community around community health issues? And that was, easy things like having community yoga in our sculpture garden. But there's also much more deep engagements that we never in a million years would have imagined on our own. Like the fact that Bridget Caswell proposed, what if we had students photograph their food for 2 weeks, learn about photography, then develop that film and see actually what they did put in their bodies for 2 weeks, and compare that with a nutritionist from Cleveland Clinic on actually how that matches up with what they should have ate and how they can make healthier choices. Then to follow up that experience with then taking fruits and vegetables and making creative displays out of it. I don't know what vegetables those are. I think the bottom one's a carrot, the top thing. I'm not sure what I can tell what that is right there from there. But to really get creative and look at their food in a different way. to really think about their diet in a different way. And then it has allowed us also to think about other things in a much more different way. You know, one of our big issues is we've been ownership obsessed. During Q&A, I'll probably bring up some random statistics about why that particularly is, but it's not allowed us to actually delve into multifamily like we could or should. This past fall, we launched the first renter equity program in Northeast Ohio, where all of the artists that move into our new multifamily space, like Max, are now in a space where they have a dedicated workspace, but they also earn $4,400 from running from us over 5 years if they participate in the resident council and also do a little bit of community arts volunteer activity each month, allowing them to earn assets while they rent, which actually at $4,400 over 5 years turns out to be more than they would actually pay off during a typical 30-year mortgage, just because of your amortization schedule being interest first and principal later. It allows people that are not in an ownership position, not ready to do that, to actually touch and feel those things, that possibility, and us to prepare them for home ownership when they graduate after 5 years, or they can stay. That's cool. They can earn up to 10 grand over those 10 years. And all of this kind of culminates in what we just recently did, which was our ballot box project. You know, one of the things I showed you, most of the experiences we had were panel review processes, which is very typical in the arts world. A bunch of artists propose a project, then we go in a secret room with what we think are experts. We come out with scores. It isn't, you know, it isn't fully transparent. People want to be part of the decision, especially when we're doing community art intentionally in the neighborhood with people. So what we want to do is actually have the neighborhood vote on how $120,000 of arts placemaking dollars get spent. So this past spring, we did a parade literally through the neighborhood where neighborhood artists made a big ruckus to say it's time to vote. And we had over 520 people come out and actually vote on how $120,000 got spent. Every one of those people that came out, we made sure was already a registered voter, or we registered for them to vote in this upcoming November presidential election. And we did it just in time that if they wanted an absentee ballot, we could make that happen. One of the things that this little thing is very touchy. One of the things that we're very excited about that process is that we actually were able to have these elections also occur inside Collinwood High School, where over 140 students, aged 14 to 18, experienced their first touch of a real ballot. The ballots that we used during Ballot Box Project were actually created for us by the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections. So all of those students that were at Collinwood High School had the chance to actually touch and feel a real ballot as they start to graduate up to 18, and frankly gave us one more opportunity to make sure that those of them that will be 18 in November are registered to vote. And then one of the things that came out of that now is we have 9 fantastic projects that are underway now that'll actually continue to engage the community around a variety of topics. So how do we know this stuff is I'm sorry, I'm one step ahead of myself. So when you add it all up, all of those 200 projects over the last 5 years start to make a huge difference. Not all of them were successes, but when we do all of these things together, you end up really making a massive activity that occurs. So one of the things that we do every year to track to make sure what we're doing matters is we take an annual attitudinal survey. So one of the things that we do is we make sure we ask questions of our residents, 17 different questions about how things are going in the neighborhood. And we've been tracking that year on and year out to figure out what we should be continuing to invest in going forward to make sure what we're doing is making a difference. So as you can clearly see from here, a variety of factors have been a huge uptick from those 200 projects and other investments that have happened in the neighborhood. But we still have work to do. Well, I'm ahead of myself one more time. I gotta get my mind right with the slides I made. So these are all the added areas where right now the factors that we work on we think are at a high enough metric, a high enough number that we don't feel are issues of concern, right? You won't hear Northeast Shores talk about doing a massive activity around walkability because our neighbors think, our residents feel that their perception is that the neighborhood's already walkable. Where you will see us continue to make investments in is here. These are the 5 areas that I have yet to successfully get over 55%, which for us is the threshold for where we're going to continue to make investments. So don't be surprised when you get in the newsletter or you read about Northeast Shores making additional investments in cleanliness or health or quality of life or safety. It's because we've got to get, perception is reality. I have the lowest crime rate on the east side of Cleveland and the fourth lowest crime rate in the city of Cleveland, but yet only 40% of residents feel like it's a safe neighborhood. It's not a safe neighborhood. I can say that till I'm blue in my face. I can show people, how little incidents of crime occur in the neighborhood. If neighborhood residents think it's unsafe, it's an unsafe neighborhood. I've got to get that number up, and we have to have, and we're going to continue to explore is how we use arts and culture to engage the neighborhood around safety to get that number up in future surveys. And I could end there, but I want to make sure you guys understand it really is about the individual artists and the difference they're making. This is Jessica Pinsky, who runs that Praxis Fiber Studio, that now, thanks to a very small grant, is doing a monthly activity where she's actually having domestic violence survivors come in and speak for the first time about what they went through as part of our neighborhood community health issue. So there's a small cohort that's actually working in textiles, but actually allowing them an opportunity to have a community place to heal. It's about Stephen Bivens, who's not only participating in our Renter Equity program, but just was awarded through the Ballot Box Project for him to take photographs of neighborhood leaders so we can capture this moment. So we have this moment in history, and we have a great filmography of what actually has been occurring and what is happening now, and also giving people a self-esteem boost that small business owners and residents that are involved and engaged matter and are doing things important enough that we're taking the time to make sure that they get their portrait taken. It's about Daniel Gray Contour, who's also part of our Renter Equity program, who just opened his 12 literary studio where neighborhood residents are coming out and getting involved and actually learning about storytelling and learning about poetry and those kind of activities. It's about these kind of experiences that when you combine them, really show how the glue of arts and culture is going across racial boundaries and across age ranges throughout our neighborhood. And that's my spiel. And now we're going to go over there, right?
So I'd like to remind people in the audience that we do have question cards, and if you need one or you have one that you have written a question on, just hold it up and Molly will collect it. So I'm going to start. I'm going to take the prerogative by thanking our really good speakers and asking the first question. But first, I just want to, Dennis mentioned a survey that was being done nationally that was looking at how community development groups use arts and culture in their neighborhoods. And I think I just want to run through the list of what they have identified and think each of our speakers really touched on one or more of these reasons why you would use the arts to facilitate community development. So first of all is the arts are visible. They communicate a neighborhood identity, and they are a shared point of pride. I think, Brian, you talked about that. Yuval, Mike, you talked about that. They are the heart. They come from the heart, and they represent the heart of a community. They are an organizing tool and a bridge between different groups, whether they're racial or income, cultural groups. They can help stabilize a community. I'm really interested in hearing more about your Renter Equity program. That's a great example of how artists are being used to stabilize a community. And I think they're generative. That came out in this survey that Dennis mentioned. They bring about more investment. So the first question I just want to ask is related to this last point of being generative and leveraging other investment. So it's a two-part question. Where do you find the greatest sources of funding for the arts, and how do you use it to leverage other investment in your neighborhood? And
Right. So I think the thing that's been really interesting, and people might not be aware of when they think about arts and community development, and I think this is really a great question that you asked, not just period, but the fact that we're asking that here. If you actually look at most of the investments that the three of us have made, most of it has been from fairly typical traditional federal funding sources that we've just been deployed in a different way. We're still not, except for a little bit of your capital campaign, the three of us are not experiencing a lot of direct arts funding from typical traditional philanthropic sources, because in most of those cases, those funding sources are particularly dedicated on the quality of the actual work. That's a very important piece of that philanthropic realm. And in many of our cases, we're actually talking about community engagement through an arts language, which doesn't always commit to a high quality art outcome. So what we find actually is that because of the work of Art Place and because of the work of the NEA, they've been able to make sure that each of the federal departments are now much more sensitive to arts and culture as being a key component to their actual federal programs than they have traditionally been. But that's not a secret. So what happens now is that every federal grant announcement, every federal grant program, we are charged with coming up with some really innovative ways to differentiate ourselves from the field. When nationally people are going in for these NEA grants, or frankly just going in for a typical HUD award, and you're plugging that in, just saying you're going to add public art to a streetscape project is not sufficient. It really has to be about engaging that neighborhood and being a critical component. It can't just be, we're doing a streetscape and a public sculpture has to be erected. Because if you want to put that application in, you can be one of literally hundreds across the nation when you do that. So thankfully, we've been able, all three of us have been able to, and other places, have been able to tap kind of our neighborhood creativity to make sure it's unique and specific to what's been going on in our neighborhood.
And I'll just answer that by saying that during the period of the Gordon Square Arts District Capital Campaign, that was a very succinct story that funders could wrap their mind around. 3 theaters, building 1 theater, revitalizing 2 theaters. You know what you're going to get at the end of this capital campaign. It had a distinct start and end and a distinct result. And so this is definitely a new phase and a new era of now what in Gordon Square, and how do you continue to create, I think all of the partners, all of us are in agreement that we want to continue to bring the arts outside of the walls of the theater and into the streets and really make arts accessible. And that's something I didn't mention in my presentation. One thing that brought the 3 Gordon Square partners together was a commitment to social justice. And that's something you will see playing out right now as the theaters carry out their core missions. For example, ticket prices. Near West Theater, even though they moved into a $7 million new home, still charges $10 for an adult ticket and $8 for a child. Just that commitment to accessibility. Cleveland Public Theater, you can see live theater on Monday or Thursday night for $12. Capitol Theater, we have $1 family films in the summer. So just that commitment. But I was just also wanting to continue to answer the question. This is a new phase post-capital campaign. How do you raise funds? One thing that I've been amazed by is that our partners, Cleveland Public Theater and Near West Theater, having gone through the capital campaign, now are kind of powerhouse fundraisers in ways you might not expect arts organizations to be. A lot of organizations are really good at making art, really hard to do the business side. And it's really hard to create time to do the business side. So Cleveland Public Theater, for example, recently got an Art Place grant. They also got a $500,000 grant from the Cleveland Foundation to take some of their programs to the next level. Some of you might have heard about Station Hope, which is performance art related to Underground Railroad. Check it out because they're doing something called Road to Hope, which is taking that around the region and doing performances around the region, so really scaling up. So one thing I'm excited about is not only our involvement in the arts, but having seen our partners really become powerhouse fundraisers themselves.
I don't need to add, I think Brian spoke pretty accurately for fundraising from our perspective, but I did want to say from the list that you guys came up with, the one thing that we find, and I think it's pretty evident from the 3 stories up here, was that the arts, one of the other outcomes is that you've changed the conversation in a neighborhood. And so you've made it easy for people to stop thinking for a second about the blight and abandonment, even when you're talking about blight and abandonment. That's what's so crazy about it, is that it actually makes it gives people a positive forum to have a discussion around, and it shifts the conversation into, instead of just negativity, to positivity. And that's the beauty of it. And that's why I've heard people say, we can't have another arts district, even though clearly there's 3 separate arts districts doing 3 separate things, and I don't think there's a limit to that. But more importantly, you can't not have arts in your community. You're just not going to lead a good discussion for any positive direction for that neighborhood.
Two questions from the audience, and they're both really similar, so I'm going to combine them. They both refer to Tremont and this kind of shift from, the first question says art galleries and small quirky stores are disappearing and apparently to be rehabbed as housing. Thoughts on how to stabilize a neighborhood so it does not lose the attributes that made it attractive in the first place. I think this, and the second question is very similar. So, and I want to put a little bit of another spin on it. Do you think arts or being attracted to artists is a phase, for lack of a better word, that neighborhoods go through on this pathway of transition? Or do you see it as something that needs to be sustained and nurtured over time? And then if so, how do you do that?
So I think the familiar tale is the artists arrive, the so-called urban pioneers, followed by, in the not too distant future, the realtors promoting the neighborhood, and then gentrification, whatever term you want to use, follows. Tremont, like the other neighborhoods, still has a very high poverty rate, about a third of the neighborhood. So it's diverse in the sense it's got much more affluent residents. It's presumably attracted by what's happened over the last couple decades, but it's got a lot of the older residents and lower income folks still living there. Pretty difficult balance, but I think all the CDCs promote diversity, and Detroit Shoreway, I think, has over 1,000 units of affordable housing. I think Brian's program is one of the best in the sense of promoting artists owning their own homes, live-work homes, so that if the real estate values rise, the rents rise, the housing prices, they will not necessarily be ejected for lack of ownership. But that's it's a tough road to hoe, and I think every neighborhood that wants to promote not just arts, but the artist has to figure out some way, however it's done, to promote their actually living and remaining there.
Yeah, I think housing is absolutely a critical core part of the answer there. And I think the reason I chose to show the video today of Detroit Shoreway is to, again, speak to what is it like to work for an organization that's been doing real estate for 40 years. So we are sort of in a unique situation. We actually have a spin-off part of our organization that is still under our not-for-profit umbrella, but really their expertise, we have a part of our staff that has become highly differentiated, and what they do all day is real estate development, and specifically affordable housing development with a movie theater project on the side, here and there, just for fun. So, you know, what that has meant is, as Detroit Shoreway set out to preserve the fabric of the neighborhood, learn to become a developer, we now own 14 buildings. Many of those are clustered in the heart of Gordon Square. So that's a total of 259 units of affordable housing. More recently, we've been intentional about some of those units being available to artists. Our most recent building to open is the Temple and Bradley Company Lofts. If any of you have been to the Happy Dog or been to Latitude 41 or Spice, that corner of 58th and Detroit, Temple and Bradley was one of the most blighted buildings on Detroit Avenue. It really kind of was a psychological barrier that seemed to prevent investment from moving east out of the heart of Gordon Square along Detroit Avenue. That has been redeveloped as 30 units of housing, and 4 of those are artists' live-work spaces. So we are intentional about that. We have another building right in the heart of Gordon Square that has 8 artist live-work units. So I know that a core value of our organization is to preserve those housing units. We recently did a 21-unit rehab project. The organization, basically 21 apartment units in the heart of Gordon Square could have easily flipped to market rate, and Detroit Shoreway could have remained the owner and charged twice the rents in 2 seconds, or 3 times the rents. I mean, they're right there at 65th in Detroit, and we recently did a $3 million rehab, but we used low-income housing tax credits, which preserves those units for another 30 years as affordable housing. So it's just that ongoing commitment, that steady, and that use of the real estate expertise. And I know that part of what our real estate team wants to do is continue to grow, and for community development corporations that don't have that in-house, our services are actually able to be shared with other neighborhoods.
So one of the things I think we're at Northeast Shores most proud of is what's become, I guess, because they keep writing it down, a national model of how to make sure that artists have an ownership stake. So we've been obsessed for well past our artist engagement around the homeownership rate, specifically in our neighborhood. So regardless of what any of you guys think about, Collinwood or other neighborhoods or whatnot, I'm going to tell you a weird fact that probably many of you don't know. Our neighborhood boasts a higher median household income than either these 2 neighborhoods or Ohio City or a good chunk of the city of Cleveland. CAMS is still, leading the charge, but our median household income is higher than Ohio City. Where we lag, and why you're like, that's not true, which it is, you can look it up, I'm sure the data is somewhere in this building. Where it lags is actually on homeownership rate. Where in North Collinwood, the homeownership rate, when I started, was only 2 percentage points higher than the city of Cleveland average. While meanwhile, it was lagging a good 18, 20 percentage points behind Ohio City or other communities. So we've been tackling specifically making sure that people own their space, regardless of their artist status, for close to 20 years. We recently surpassed Detroit Shoreway's homeownership rate, but only because of, frankly, the number of additional rental units that have been constructed in the neighborhood, right? That there's, frankly, just more housing units now in Detroit Shoreway, and many of them are intentionally rental, so we've now surpassed them on our ownership rate. So that's a number that we're obsessed with. So what we do is we make sure that anybody that we talk to, whether an artist or not artist, whether it's commercial or residential, we make sure that we know how they're going to get a deed, how they're either going to buy their space from us immediately or they're going to buy their space from us in the near future. And that's been a very different kind of model, and something that somebody might want to look into just out of curiosity between Detroit Shoreway and us, where we've touched probably 15 or 16 properties on Waterloo Road, but right now we only own 4 or 5 of them. As those people get ready to be mortgage ready, we've sold those properties off to the artists or the businesses that are there with some intentionality, that we want to make sure that when or if they feel like the neighborhoods become something different, it's their asset base, it's their income that they then get to recapture by selling to Starbucks or whatever gentrification looks like in Cleveland that week, right? So that's kind of the goal and what we've been working on. And it's also been a huge magnet for why we're getting so many artists, and particularly musicians, relocating to the Collinwood neighborhood from a variety of other states. About 20% of buyers in Collinwood neighborhood self-define as artists, and many of them are relocating from the East Coast and now recently the West Coast, because frankly, they're tired of moving. They're tired of making a place hip and cool, and then relocating and making a place hip and cool, and then the rents rise, so they relocate. They want to stop moving around because they're just kind of sick of it. So one of the things that we've been really obsessive about making sure of is that everybody we work with, we know how they're going to own, which is in some ways to our detriment, because some people want to visit Cleveland and maybe live here, and they want to rent for a little while, and at least through our organization before the renter equity model, we didn't have an answer for them. We're like, well, there's rental housing, go knock yourself out. That's not something we felt like was frankly kind of our core competency, which was making sure that they had the road to a deed. So that's kind of an example of what we've been doing to make sure that what's happened throughout this country where artists make a place safe and then people can come in and then frankly make it unaffordable to them, how we've been able to make sure that like the end point is artists in our neighborhood. At least that's been our goal for the last 8 years now.
Again, I think Brian is so far ahead of the curve on this that it's really compelling, but it is the experience that artists think differently about things than the average person, so they're going to see space in different ways and imagine it in different ways, which is just going to naturally convey to the broader public. And so you will get, wherever artists go, you're going to get people that follow. And I don't know what the answer is, frankly, because there's sort of an inevitability about change. You don't want places to stay abandoned forever with just a few artists in there. You do want the rest of the things to be filled up too. So there's a balance in there that I'm really glad that there's smarter people than me that are thinking about it. But it's interesting because we're seeing it sort of real time in this neighborhood. In fact, just north of here, there's a series of warehouses on Superior, some of which are going to be taken by the Inner Belt expansion, and then a few of which have been recently purchased by a developer. And we know how price sensitive the group is of artists and creatives that are in those buildings, and by virtue of changing, fixing the roof and putting in new windows, you've immediately priced out a big portion of the people that currently occupy those. And so where do they go? And it's actually interesting because the Cleveland Foundation is very interested in the discussion of what does the 21st century artist community look like. I think they are talking to you as well. They've been talking to us because we know that there's some displacement of artists that's coming. How do we create the next neighborhood that supports them ongoing, and is that the desired outcome? And exactly what these guys said. What we're working on is artists live, work. In our case, also sell spaces that we can create. We're doing at East 40th. We're in pre-development right now, but it's a series of 11 individual houses that all have these great garage doors that can open up, and they can all sell on certain days, like their own, art walk, just like we saw in Tremont, but just for this little mini pocket neighborhood. So that's one of the things that we're working on, but there's a much broader discussion that's happening around this.
We have time for one more question, and it's kind of a segue from what you just said, Mike, of where, maybe where are artists going to go next, or is anybody thinking about arts and culture to help save East Cleveland? Does any of our panelists? Now, I do know that there is people are doing a lot of art in East Cleveland and using it as a community building tool. I've been to a couple programs there, but does anybody have any thoughts about that?
I think from the experience you see up here that it has to be organic. And you have to really look at what's going on in the community and the assets that you have there. And so, we could probably come up with some ideas just like anybody who's gone through this school could, but in reality, there's got to be a real drill down with the residents that live there, and that's the greatest asset, obviously, is the people of the community. But that's where you start to figure out what art can mean in a place, and then that's how it becomes transformative, is because it's rooted in the people that are there.
I think Mike encapsulated that perfectly. I think the challenge of revitalization is to, like you said, drill down into your indigenous strengths and assets. And that does come from interacting with the community. And again, in the case of Gordon Square, literally there were abandoned theater buildings. And in that sense, it was natural, although very difficult financially, for it to become, once again, a theater district. But that was the core asset from which to rebuild. We really couldn't be the home of Currentavania, really. We don't have a large Slovenian population. We have Romanian and Italian and Irish and German, historically. But again, it's about what do you have there? What are your core, what are your roots? What are your assets?
Ditto.
Well, I think that's a really good place to end, which is look to the strengths of your neighborhood and build from there and build on that. Do you want to?
One thing, and probably many of you heard this if you've heard Jason Schupak or anybody else say it, but we want to make sure somebody says it today too. The greatest thing about artists is that every single community has them, right? We can get up here, we can talk about Lake Erie or an I-9 or a freeway exit or, you know, or having a hospital in your backyard. Those are things that are not necessarily something you can take back to wherever you came from for a solution for where you're from. Every single neighborhood has, in this rural or urban, has people in a church choir, has people knitting, has people doing storytelling, right? It's an innate thing that's part of our very DNA ever since we started scrolling on cave walls. It's the communication of using arts as a language to discuss difficult issues is something that can be done anywhere regardless of what other features or assets are in your neighborhoods. And that's why, you know, whether it's East Cleveland or whether it's making Solon better, anywhere you go, arts is a way, or arts and culture is a language that people could use more intentionally to make their neighborhood stronger.